Most of you are probably seeing this guy for the first time. This is Yasser Abu Markia, a 49-year-old Palestinian citizen from the city of Hebron in the West Bank. He has 4 children, and his family's been living in Hebron for decades despite all the restrictions that the Israeli occupation imposes on Palestinians in the West Bank in general. Around 3 years ago, Yasser experienced something strange. In the middle of 2021, his 6-year-old daughter was playing on the roof of their house near the Ibrahimi Mosque in the Old City. Like any child, in the midst of mischief and jumping around, she dropped a small metal teaspoon from the roof onto the empty street. Not a big deal, right? Or is it? Actually, for the Israelis, it was a big deal. And after a few minutes, Yasser was surprised by a group of occupation soldiers at their door of his house to see what had happened. And after an intense altercation, they threatened him that he would be summoned on charges of throwing stones. Crazy, right? As for Yasser, who told this story to the Washington Post, and as for all the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank, especially in Hebron, what happened is not strange, but rather a behavior that the Israelis have maintained systematically after their huge efforts over the past years to deploy all kinds of surveillance systems, from traditional monitoring tools like fingerprinting and personal IDs, through checkpoints and automated surveillance towers, drones, mobile phone eavesdropping, and even cameras equipped with facial recognition technology and artificial intelligence systems. With all of that, they created databases for the Palestinians and turned the West Bank into one of the most monitored and most dangerous places in the world. In today's episode, we'll understand what these surveillance programs are and how the Israeli occupation has turned the lives of Palestinians into a hell without any privacy or safety in the entire West Bank. So how have the Israelis built the largest and most aggressive surveillance system in the region and one of the largest in the world? And why? We'll know that together in a few minutes. I'm Ashraf Ibrahim, and this is Mad Economics. In 2020, there was a strange scene in the West Bank, where full patrols of Israeli occupation soldiers would come through West Bank's streets and homes, capturing as many photos as possible of any Palestinian they encountered, whether men, women, elderly, or children. They did this using special smartphones distributed by the occupation army, and they even offered prizes to unit members who captured the most photos. So what's their goal? The goal was to build a mega database that feeds into a comprehensive system called Wolfpack, a technology used along with others to monitor Palestinians in the West Bank 24 hours a day. But before explaining that, we need to go back a bit and quickly understand the history of the occupation's surveillance of Palestinians, and how facial recognition technologies have evolved globally. The truth is, the saga of the extensive surveillance and precise monitoring of Palestinians by the occupation began years before the official establishment of Israel, specifically in 1916, when an entity called the Arab Bureau, affiliated with the British Imperial Intelligence, was established. It was based in Cairo and was responsible for intelligence activities in the Middle East colonies of the empire. Although the office lasted only 4 years, until 1920, as the British terminated it due to its failure, it made something effective for Zionists, as it created files for the most important Palestinian families immediately after Britain occupied Palestine, containing their basic data, such as names, ages, number of family members, work, marital status, and etc. In addition to their mental characteristics, their level of affiliation, and their ability to influence, to the point that these files had both strengths and weaknesses. The Zionists greatly benefited from this experience, taking it to a higher level, and the details were mentioned by the well-known Israeli historian Ilan Pappe in his famous book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. After the brutal suppression of the Palestinian revolt by the British occupation, and its termination after 3 years of its breakout, the Zionist gangs exploited the weakness of the Palestinian community and began to attack the 1,200 Palestinian villages that existed at that time. However, these attacks were random and lacked planning. serving as retaliatory and harmful attacks against the Palestinians, nothing more. The system of attack did not appeal to a young historian working as an employee in the educational department of the Jewish agency named Ben Zion Luria. This young man implicitly said that the attack in this manner is not effective, and we need a system. We want to attack, but with accurate information. So what will benefit us here is to make detailed records of the Palestinian villages. Then he sent his proposal in a letter to the Jewish National Fund. The fund, as described by Pape, was the main Zionist tool for colonizing Palestine. And that's why Ben Zion's choice was very successful. Because the fund, specifically the director of its settlement department, Joseph Weitz, immediately caught on to the idea, and Joseph proposed turning it into a national project called Village Files. The result they achieved later was extraordinary. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, as a result of this project, the Zionists had a detailed database for every village in Palestine. And when I say every village, I mean it literally. Every village had a file in the Village Files project. And these files contained very detailed and unprecedented information for that time. Each file included the topographic location of each village, clear aerial photographs taken through continuous Zionist-operated flights under the guise of aviation education and training tours, access routes to each village, the type of land, the number of water springs, the main sources of income, social and economic composition, religious affiliations of its residents, their ages, and their relationships with other villages. The files included so much information that they even indicated the level of the village's hostility to the Zionist project based on its participation in the Palestinian revolt, accompanied by a list of all those who participated in it, from the residents of each village in their respective files. Of course, this was an astonishing level of surveillance for that time. In 1943, one of their slaughterers, named Ezra Dannon, took this database and transferred it to a completely different level. The village files now included the number of families in each village, the number of cars, the names of shop owners and workers in various workshops, the names of craftsmen, their skills, political affiliations, personal descriptions, and mental abilities. It was a tremendous leap for the village files to the extent that Ezra even included in each village file a section to record the number of trees on each farm and information about animal husbandry in each village, among other astonishing details. Therefore, the files of the villages were one of the most important reasons for the success of the Zionists in committing the documented crimes they did before and during the Nakba. But more importantly, we can consider it as the first database and monitoring system that the occupation meticulously operates. Now we'll go back in time to the 1960s, when facial recognition technology appeared in the light for the first time. And there began to be interest in it, as companies increased their investments in the field of surveillance worldwide, and particularly in the US, due to the increasing demand for these technologies from security agencies and military institutions, to the point that revenues from official requests in America for facial recognition technologies reached about 60% of its total revenue. In the 1990s, the U.S. Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA, advanced facial recognition algorithms through their invention of some of the most important technologies that greatly improved the performance of those algorithms. DARPA's technologies have paved the way for their use for the first time in commercial and civilian applications. In fact, this can be seen now with the presence of facial recognition in various aspects of our daily lives. In airport cameras, in our mobile phones that we unlock with facial recognition, in large stores, hospitals, shopping centers, and other public places. Because of this, the market for facial recognition technology specifically is growing significantly, with the market reaching $3.8 billion in 2020 and expected to grow to $8.5 billion in the coming year 2025. Unfortunately, the main use of these technologies is comprehensive surveillance of populations by security agencies, law enforcement, and government systems in general. This occurs when certain programs have a database of a vast number of images, including driver's license photos, various government records, and others. These programs, used by security agencies and intelligence in some countries, compare these images with footage from security cameras, public street cameras, and video clips from various open or private sources. The matching is based on geometric points that differentiate each face. such as the distance between the eyes, forehead, chin, and so on. Here we need to consider that there's currently an ongoing conflict regarding the regulations of these market technologies, especially in the US, where the official use of facial recognition technology has been banned in a number of major cities, such as Boston and San Francisco. The internal American debate is ongoing between state governments and protesting human rights associations, and some cities have begun to reconsider or are already reversing the ban. However, if we look at the occupied Palestinian territories, we'll find a completely different world, where Palestinians have no rights due to the occupation that treats them as foreign entities rather than the rightful owners of the land. This takes us to the technological system of surveillance and control used by the Israeli occupation. Here, I want you to imagine this scene with me. Imagine living in a 2-bedroom house that overlooks a street with, let's say, 10 houses. This street is equipped with 20 cameras, 2 cameras focused on each house, monitoring it 24 hours a day. From the moment you step out of your house, every move you make, every action you take, and every person you greet or talk to is being monitored. If you want to buy something from a store, for instance, you have to pass through electronic gates for security checks coming and going. You might encounter someone who forcibly records you for any reason and stores your information in a specific system. Upon returning home, you repeat through the same ordeal, and if someone visits you, the cameras in your house will detect and identify them, recording their personal information if it's not already registered. Some cameras can even reach the courtyard of your house, and possibly even one of the 2 rooms. Your phone and electronic devices are being spied on, and civilian and military drones sometimes fly over houses and farms, monitoring your movements and that of your family. In short, your entire life is under constant surveillance every minute of the day. In the occupied West Bank, especially in Hebron, this is exactly what happens as described, or as the Palestinian activist, Amro Issa, who heads a group called Friends of Hebron, stated in his conversation with the Washington Post, the occupation cameras only monitor Palestinians from the moment anyone leaves his house until they return. If we go back to the early 2000s, we'll find that this was the period when the Israeli occupation began to introduce the idea of electronic surveillance for the West Bank, specifically the old part of occupied Jerusalem. The first experiment was through a system called Mabat 2000, which, according to Amnesty International organization, was the preferred surveillance system for the Israelis. The goal was to install closed-circuit television cameras in as many streets and alleys of the old city of Jerusalem as possible. The occupation started developing this system in 2017 to support facial and vehicle recognition, as well as other objects. They also added a watch list and security tracking for a number of Palestinians, along with predictive tools to constantly determine their locations through intensive monitoring. In 2020, the Jerusalem municipality expanded its use of Mabat 2000 by installing 1,000 cameras, in addition to enhancing the system itself by adding video analysis technology. This enables the occupation to identify unusual activities in public places and streets. Out of the 1,000 cameras, 100 are capable of recognizing various faces and objects and transmitting this data to servers for rapid analysis. This was confirmed by the organization Who Profits in March 2022, which stated that there are 400 CCTV cameras installed throughout the old city, broadcasting live feeds of the residents' movements to the occupying police 24 hours a day. This means there's approximately 1 camera for each citizen, which is a frightening and unnatural ratio. If we leave Jerusalem and go to its southern part, like Silwan for example, and compare the number of cameras there 15 years ago and now, we would find that in 2008 there were 60 cameras, and last year, in 2023, that number had increased to 243. In this city, there's only about 60,000 Palestinians, so approximately every 250 people have a camera. This is without mentioning the privately owned cameras belonging to settlers, which they also use to monitor Palestinians, and we don't even know how many there are. If we focus on Hebron and take it as an example, we can easily consider it as the most monitored area in the occupied territories. That's why the Israeli occupation army referred to it in an article published in 2020 on its official website as the Smart City of Hebron, and described the surveillance system there as a unique development of the security system in the West Bank. This development occurred through the installation of a new system of cameras and radars throughout the city. According to the article, this system's capable of documenting anything that happens. As I emphasized before, the Israeli empire of surveillance over Palestinians has many components: observation towers, monitoring with television cameras, facial recognition cameras, radars, electronic inspection gates, drones, and more. However, what I want to focus on today is the Wolfpack system. Now let's go to the Israeli deep dark forest. The Wolfpack system is a database containing profiles for almost every Palestinian in the West Bank, including their recent personal photos, family histories, education, and security classifications for each individual. This massive database has been described by a former Israeli occupation soldier as a secret Facebook for Palestinians used exclusively by the Israeli army. The database or system is classified into three sections: red, blue, and white. The Red Wolf is a facial recognition system used at checkpoints and crossings in the West Bank, particularly in Hebron. What happens is that Israel, like any apartheid system, closes off streets and imposes mandatory routes and movement for Palestinians through these gates. When you enter through any gate, the cameras monitor and quickly compare your face with tens of thousands of stored images in the Wolfpack database, categorizing you according to your classification in the database within a few seconds. You could either be categorized as green, which means you can pass, yellow, meaning you'll be subjected to a more thorough security check and detained for an unspecified amount of time according to the mood of the occupation soldiers at the checkpoint, or red, indicating that you have likely participated in protests, anti-occupation activities, or have been previously arrested or interrogated by the occupation army, and will be prevented from crossing, possibly being quickly and directly arrested by the soldiers. So, is the process of facial monitoring and capturing the image approved and consented to by the Palestinians each time it occurs? The answer is absolutely not. And this is contrary to any law, by the way, or any place with respectable laws that all require the person's consent before capturing their image for any purpose, especially for security purposes. As for the Blue Wolf, occupation soldiers use it on special mobile phones, and then it's transformed into an application on regular mobile phones. You can consider it a mobile checkpoint, practicing the same function as the Red Wolf, but in a mobile form within the framework of the Wolfpack. Okay, now we know about the Red and Blue Wolves. So what's the White Wolf? The White Wolf is specific to Jewish settlers in the West Bank. You can consider it a gift from the Israeli army to them. It's a version that security volunteers can use to scan the identification card of any Palestinian, for example, before entering any settlement, whether as a worker or in other situations. However, this is done without the settler being able to arrest the Palestinians whose identities they're checking. In 2019, the Israeli army admitted the existence of the White Wolf in a right-wing magazine. This discussion leads us to some companies that supply the Israeli army with technologies that help it violate all the rights of Palestinians in this manner. Here, we must mention one of the most important suppliers of the Israeli army with facial recognition technologies, which is the Israeli company Bosto, formerly known as AnyVision. The company provided the army with a technology called Google Eyesh, which recognizes Palestinians through cameras spread throughout the entire West Bank. This company's been causing problems and controversy since 2019 due to selling its technologies to the Israeli army, leading to Microsoft withdrawing its investment in it in 2019. Bosto currently exports its technology to over 40 countries worldwide, and it's used in 100,000 cameras, including those in the United States, Japan, Russia, Hong Kong, Mexico, and Spain. It's evolving through a subsidiary called SiteX, which is developing drones that can recognize faces and will be used in buildings and cities. These are the drones currently used by the Israeli army for monitoring people in Gaza, leading to mass killing them and controlling protests and demonstrations in the occupied territories. And sometimes they're also used to disperse crowds with tear gas canisters. They want to add the ability to monitor and recognize individuals. We also have another company, Quora AI, which is jointly owned by the Israeli company Quora and the Canadian company AWZ. During the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, they developed technology that allows for facial recognition even if people are wearing masks. This technology is also used by the occupying police to monitor cities in the West Bank. These companies, along with others, are developing technologies in a multi-billion-dollar industry, as we've explained, and they have buyers from notorious regimes, with the occupation at the forefront. Even though Osto has a terrible reputation, it managed to raise $235 million in a single funding round in 2021, less than 2 years after Microsoft withdrew its investment in it. The problem with the technologies developed by these companies and others, whether they involve facial recognition, databases, or other surveillance systems, is, first and foremost, their violation of privacy for any individual. Such violations often lead to harm or endangering people's safety. So, when the occupying army uses modern technologies like these, what can be expected? Certainly, countless calamities, violations, and harm to Palestinians along the way. This is actually what occurs from the Israelis who want to exercise as much control over the Palestinians as possible, or even to attempt to entirely displace them, as is happening in Palestinian areas such as Silwan, especially when blackmail is the preferred currency of the occupying intelligence. Consequently, this illegal and intrusive surveillance gives them the upper hand over Palestinians and allows them to control their lives in every way, wasting their days at checkpoints, exploiting the illness of some of them to obtain specific information or interests, sowing discord among them, arresting a number of them, and so on. But there's another major problem with facial recognition systems, which are still relatively new and have not yet evolved in a secure manner. Simply put, they're not accurate enough until today, despite significant efforts from technology companies to overcome these issues. Some facial recognition systems confuse people with darker skin tones and struggle to identify them. There's tragic stories in many places around the world, including in the US, where individuals have been arrested on false charges simply because these systems have mistaken them for actual criminals. The irony is that the extreme right wing in the government of Netanyahu has been trying since the last year to pass a new law that allows the police and the responsible security ministers, most of whom are currently from the right, to use facial recognition technology, collect data, images, and footage from all cameras in any location in the occupied Palestine without judicial orders. In other words, they want to use the same technologies on the citizens of the occupied territory. Of course, this proposed law has faced significant objections from Israeli human rights organizations and former ministers. But more importantly, and here lies the irony, some of the occupying soldiers who use the Wolfpack system are even more opposed because they know the system's danger and its complete invasion of anyone's life anywhere. They've experienced it. The problem with some human rights activists and the Israeli surveillance industry is that it's a technological industry that's subject to almost no oversight, and it expands at an unstoppable pace, according to Jonathan Hempel, an Israeli journalist and researcher. But all of this is specific to the citizens of the occupation, of course. In the occupied territories, discussing what I'm saying is definitely a luxury because the Israelis don't consider the Palestinians as a nation or people with any human rights in any direction. There are no human rights for Palestinians, as assumed. An example of that, almost 37,000 dead Gazans, and more than 85,000 injured on the hands of the Israeli army in just 8 months. This episode is a documentation of a small part of what is happening to the Palestinians, and the violations they endure for decades and still. In the end, we hope that the Israeli criminal aggression against the Palestinians stops after months of the long, ongoing war. Thank you for tuning in. See you in the next one.